The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. The Phoenix Suns have swept the Denver Nuggets and now are technically 4 wins away from the NBA Finals. My name is Mike, and I'm here with Sam. Sam, how are you doing?
I am doing fucking amazing. 8 down, 8 to go. 8 down, 8 to go. We're halfway there, guys. We're halfway there.
Yeah, we're allowed to be a little bit confident now. We have a guest joining us. Very, very exciting and a perfect time, I think, to join us on this podcast. First time ever for a post-game podcast. We're having a guest, David Nash, former host of the 7 Seconds or Less podcast.
His playoff debut.
How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good, guys. It's nice to join you both after these. As I said to you before we hit record, I've listened to every one of these. I think it's been amazing that you guys have been churning these out. Thankfully, the Suns are giving us plenty to be excited about and you guys plenty to talk about on these pods. But yeah, I'm glad to jump on after clinching the series. We set this one up a few days ago and I kind of joked that, of course, we'd probably drop the game just to make it a little less exciting to do. But we did it, guys, and we're here. As Sam said, we're halfway there to the end goal, and that just feels surreal to even consider right now.
You know, it's funny you say that about giving us so much to talk about because you're right, but also the first thought I had tonight was, oh my God, this is awesome. The Suns are going to the Western Conference Finals. The second thought I had tonight was, what the hell do we do for the next week? Because it's been, for the past week, it's just Mike and I, we've been doing these podcasts every 2 days. I've blocked all of my free time around there's a Suns game, watch the Suns game, talk about the Suns game. And now I have to sit and Clippers, Jazz haven't even played Game 4 yet. Game 4 is tomorrow night.
Yeah, and it looks like it might go for a while. It's even almost kind of hard to come on a podcast after wins and just talk about winning because there's not a lot of adjustments that the Suns needed to make throughout that entire time. So we're just sort of basking in the glory of the wins over and over and over again. But I think right now, after they are now in the Western Conference Finals, is a perfect time to do that. It's funny because so many things that we talked about this season. Obviously, Sam and I, every episode, at least once a week, every week this season. David on Twitter, writing about it in the newsletter. Now, they did it. Even with all the inexperience, which I think was a big storyline. And it means a lot, I think, to Suns fans. There was a moment at the end of the game while Chris Paul was being interviewed on TNT, and there was just literally thousands of Suns fans in the arena, the Ball Arena, I believe it's called, in Denver, going wild for the Suns winning, and it just means a lot. How did you feel, David, when that final buzzer rang and the Suns actually won?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because that was really interesting to see at the end of the game there. They were chanting, I think half the crowd was chanting MVP and the other half was chanting CP3 at the same time. It was all a bit of a mess there when he was doing his post-game interview. But, I'm willing to admit it. This is the first time in many, many years I've been jealous during the Phoenix home games not to be there. Sam, I know you've gone through similar experiences being on the other coast of the US there, and I just haven't missed being on the couch watching Suns games for a long time because it really hasn't been there hasn't been too much jealousy from the product that's been on the floor. But as someone who watches this team habitually and probably too much to my the rest of my life's disadvantage sometimes, but I've been jealous. And then the away crowd, holy shit, I remember you guys touching on the Lakers kind of infiltrating our building on home games. That really felt like a home crowd there, and CP3 even mentioned it as much. And then, you see Devin Booker's family in the crowd, you see Chris Paul's family in the crowd with Devin Booker's family. It was hard not to get a little bit emotional about it, to be perfectly honest. It just felt like we were all part of something, and I think the team's done a great job obviously led by Monty, kind of making this feel like it's everyone's playoff run, not just the players on the court.
I love how it's so sentimental and means something different to every person. Tons of new fans being sucked into the energy for the first time. Tons of old fans who have really chartered the muddy waters of the past 10 years, the past 20 years, the past 50 years, who know what this means and could potentially mean for the city if they were to go all the way. And then, as you talked about, the players, each with their own individual legacies and histories to think about. It's just been an amazing run. And you're right, David. I am jealous. I absolutely have got to get out there next year. That's my plan at some point for sure. But I'm jealous to not be there right now because it looks amazing. I also thought all of our buddy Max McCauley made a great point earlier today. He talked about the Suns and he talked about the Suns having home court, which we all knew going into the Western Conference Finals, but that because of that home court, those games are going to fall on the Saturday and Thursday nights, the Suns' home games. The road games are going to be on like the Tuesdays and shit. That's going to be amazing. I mean, that's going to be a truly special experience if you have the opportunity to go to the arena for one of those games on a Saturday night, on a Thursday night. I'm sure it's going to be nuts. I like can't even begin to imagine. I've never had an experience like that personally of just, because the Suns are my favorite team by far in any sport. And I've never seen a Suns game live to this day. It's kind of crazy. We've been doing this for 3 years. I've never even seen this team live outside of I've seen them live in New York at MSG and Barclays, but I've never seen them live on their home turf. That just sounds like a spiritual experience, and I'm so excited that we finally get the chance to see that.
Yeah, I think I should say too. I've been to a lot of games personally because I live right next to the arena, but the home crowd now and for the last few games and what it was before is drastically different. And I think credit to Suns fans for really coming out and really showing love the way that they can, and even traveling. I saw people there at the game that I've recognized. I recognized as Phoenix natives. They weren't just people in Denver that happened to be Suns fans. They traveled. They went to that game. They paid for those tickets. They knew that the possibility of a sweep was coming, and they got to see it live and in person. I want to say, too, just about the Nuggets real quick. This is a weird game. Jokic was ejected for just a really dumb foul on Cameron Payne. I personally, I don't really care about the debate on whether or not he should have been ejected. I just think if you swing recklessly at someone's face, that's probably going to happen at some point. And regardless of the situation, I think they called it right. But whatever. But I do want to just mention that I do really respect the Nuggets a lot. Obviously, this was a tough series for them with the injuries going into this series. Not a lot of players available. Not the right guys to defend the Suns available, and really attacking them on offense was difficult without any really good guard play for their team. I went into the Lakers series sort of hating Lakers fans and the Lakers already, but I think they really kind of taught me to not enjoy them because of the amount of complaining that the Lakers did.
They're
I kind of considered them
2
babies
weeks later, by the
throughout
way,
that
so
series.
Valid.
Yeah. Yes, and I think the Nuggets, they just didn't do that. I really respected the way they acted. And even Jokic's foul, as reckless as it was, I don't think it was intentional in any way. It was just stupid and reckless, and yeah, that's almost just as bad. But I do want to say I just respect the Nuggets in a lot of ways, in ways that maybe I didn't really for the Lakers, and so shout out to them. But what do you think, David?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well there in terms of the respect between the two different series. I think I feel pretty similar to you on both sides, both the Lakers and the Nuggets. It certainly helps, not to say that the Lakers don't have some great people covering them, but I thought TJ on your pod before this series started was amazing, and Ryan Blackburn's another person that covers them on Twitter, so it certainly helps when there's good people covering the team. But outside of that, I just think that they're a much more likable team. Jokic, for whatever happened today, I was pretty heated in the moment and thought that it was pretty reckless and silly. I calmed down a little bit even myself afterwards. It certainly helped seeing the way he reacted afterwards, going up to campaign and kind of apologizing. I thought that was a important part of the process, I suppose. But yeah, I think I said it after the game, hard not to acknowledge them, where they've come from. We can only beat who are in front of us. But they were missing some pretty key pieces, Jamal Murray obviously being the biggest one, and they would have been, right in contention if he didn't go down. But then even little things like Barton not starting the series, PJ Dozier never seeing the court, it kind of hurt the whole rotation. Michael Porter Jr. was expected to be the second guy, and Aaron Gordon was expected to be the third, when they kind of traded for him to be, the fourth or fifth best guy in their starting unit. So, yeah, they had a really tough season and grinded it out. Not very fair to go out in a sweep in the second round, but, as we all know, NBA basketball isn't very fair, and it feels pretty good to be on the other side of it for once, to be honest.
I think we're all on the same page on the Jokic thing. I'm glad, David, you mentioned that about seeing his reaction and going up to Cam and saying, hey, it's nothing personal or whatever he said. But even after he was ejected, when it would have been very easy for him to not take the high road there, kind of calmed me down as well. That's not, I think we've all been there, losing our cool in the heat of a moment, and it's not something that I hold against Jokic, like, going forward. I think the officials made a tough call, but ultimately a fair call, what looked to me like a more or less by the book flagrant 2. But yeah, I that Nuggets team, I mean, I think the only things I come away with from that series, Jokic is clearly not the issue. I've seen like some Nuggets fans get riled up because a couple guys you mentioned, like, we all follow the same guys, so we see those Nuggets reporters post their analysis and their quotes from the game and their reporting, and fans will interact with them. And I've seen some Nuggets fans get riled up and say, oh, we should fire Coach Malone. And it's like, well, he just didn't have the talent. Like I know we've said there was no scheme basically that he employed that could stop the Suns offense from just rolling throughout these 4 games. But like, look at what he had to deal with. There was no adjustment he could make that would have worked. So, I don't think it's his fault. I just don't think any one person in that Denver organization necessarily should shoulder the blame here. This series maybe does make me think of MPJ in a slightly different way, if I'm being honest. That might be the only negative takeaway I have towards that franchise. Not that I hate him or anything. He's very young. This was his second season. But yeah, that might be the only thing. Otherwise, they're going to be totally fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think to the point that you're making about the players and the adjustments being made, on the opposite end of that is the Phoenix Suns. And you have Monty Williams, who I think has been brilliant throughout the playoffs in his adjustments and what he's done. And I want to give him credit for what he's done in these playoffs, because it's really to be able to play 2 drastically different teams in the Lakers and the Nuggets, and 2 all-time great players, obviously in LeBron James, and then currently an MVP in Jokic. We'll see where his career goes, but he's got an MVP. There's not a lot of players with those, so credit to that team as well. But Monty just made all the right moves. He put all the guys in the right positions to score. They were prepared on every possession to play the proper defense against who they were playing against. But I think another point on top of that, James Jones gave him the players who were capable of understanding adjustments, whether it be game to game or mid-game adjustments. Because when you talk about the Nuggets not necessarily having the guys, it's not just the talent, it's also the mind, the mindset, the ability to understand the game at the level that a lot of the players on the Suns do. I think what the Suns did in making adjustments mid-game is pretty difficult. And I just think, looking at the guys up and down the roster, whether it be Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Jay Crowder, even DeAndre Ayton, who, maybe at times we doubted, consistently they were coming through on adjustments and changes to ensure that the other team could never quite get the edge. And I just want to give credit to them because I was really impressed. I know, David, you've been tracking a lot of the adjustments in your newsletter, and I know you had a podcast and even in Spaces earlier today. I'm sure this has impressed you as well, right?
It really has. And I guess starting with Monty, I think it was last game, just looking back to that Lakers series, I think going through this series really made me appreciate the coaching and the adjustments of the Lakers series a hell of a lot more, because we haven't been drastically challenged in this latest series against the Nuggets, if we're being perfectly honest. The offense they run was looking much more like their regular season offense, at least very much to me. A lot of the plays that they were running in the half court was very similar. And that just made me really impressed by that first series, because they got dragged through the mud in that series. They weren't running any of their normal stuff because the Lakers were so good defensively and knew a lot of it, and they had the personnel to cancel a lot of that out. So they had to go back to the drawing board and work out an offense that was going to chip away at the Lakers over time, that wasn't going to be their normal regular season offense. To have to do that in your first series, with a lot of these guys never playing in the playoffs before, and Monty having them ready to do that, and the way they came out and won that game one, and then eventually won the series, that's just, I don't know, there's something about that that's ultra impressive to me. And then, on your James Jones point, definitely needs a lot of credit. I joked with Sam on Spaces earlier today. The Ryan McDonough stuff is still creeping into the telecast. They did it again tonight.
I loved that you brought that up, by the way, because that we were really, we were taking questions, we were giving our analysis, we were doing our thing, but that spiced it up a little bit.
They did it again tonight at the very end of the game, saying that
Mike wasn't there, so explain it to him.
I guess it wasn't a lie, but they've, whether it's Zach Lowe in his written pieces or on his podcast, on the telecast a few times during this series, they keep talking about the fact that he was the architect who drafted Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton and technically Mikal Bridges, and then James Jones kind of put it all together. I even noticed Reggie Miller a couple of times said that Chris Paul landed in their laps and Jay Crowder landed in their laps. Like,
Weird.
it was really off-putting, because I think that really discredits the job that James Jones has done, and I guess that's why we love that there's guys like you guys doing podcasts like this that are giving a slightly different perspective to Suns fans to listen to, because, even James Jones getting Torrey Craig, whether you want to say he landed in their lap or not, he still had to go out and get him, even though it didn't cost them anything. And, I was looking back at something that I wrote last playoffs with the last four teams, looking at the rotation players, and I think over 50% of the rotation players in the top 8 rotation of all four teams were 6'5" to 6'8" wings. And I don't know with the stats from tonight's game, but I'm sure it's probably pretty similar. If you take Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, and Torrey Craig, and Cam Johnson, I should say too, those guys I think have played something like 55% of the Suns' total minutes in both series so far. Yes, there's 5 guys there, so of course you're going to expect that they've played a hell of a lot. But as you said, Mike, James gave Monty guys that he could move to. I don't think we expected Torrey Craig, for instance, to, at least I know Max and I didn't when we previewed the Nuggets series. We didn't expect him to play as much as he ended up doing in this series. And just the fact that Monty's got those guys to interchange in and out, and probably would have had Abdul Nader as well if he didn't have the injury that he's got. Huge credit to James Jones in understanding how to build a team, which the previous GM did not have.
I almost hope he gets hired somewhere now, so that there's another bad team that we could beat up on.
That's exactly
what Max said.
You know what? Thinking about it more, what Reggie's doing, it might be like a premeditated propaganda mission of some sort, so that they can prepare us for Sean Marks winning Executive of the Year. Has that been announced yet, or when is that getting announced? Yeah,
no, I haven't seen that yet. I want to ask you guys something. Just a really simple way of putting this. I want to see if you agree. It seems like we have gotten to the point where you just can't pick on Devin Booker on defense. Now, that sounds simple, but I don't know that it's that you can't pick on him at all when he's on defense, or if maybe the teams the Suns played in the playoffs just not quite have the personnel to be able to pick on Devin Booker on defense. So I'd like to hear what you guys think on that. David, what do you think?
I think it's a little column A, a little column B, Mike. I think, looking at this series in particular, when you look how much the Suns have hunted Michael Porter Jr., I even tweeted it, I think, during the Game 3, what was happening to Michael Porter Jr. was exactly what people told us Devin Booker was going to have to go through when we tried to take any joy in the last 5 or 6 years of Devin Booker's career. That's what we kind of got thrown in our face. I think what we've seen, or at least what I've seen with how much I've commented on Michael Porter Jr., the main defenders coming back are like, yeah, but Jokic made this mistake and Austin Rivers made this mistake, and they all compounded Michael Porter Jr.'s mistake, and that's not necessarily untrue, and I think that holds weight when you compare it to someone like Devin Booker. Devin's a lot smarter. He knows the scouting report a lot better than Michael Porter Jr. from what I've seen in this series. He fights a lot harder. Whether Michael Porter Jr.'s injury had anything to do with that or not, I'll let other people decide. But just the team built around him, it insulates a guy like Devin Booker. He knows what his job is, and he can give the required effort to not really get beaten too much in that matchup that he's got, because he's got Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton. It's not a bad 4 guys to have around you in that starting lineup if you are, I guess, quote unquote, an average defender in the NBA, which I think it's about time we call Devin Booker that, not to criticize him or throw him under the bus, but I think if you use that, it's kind of a compliment compared to what he was called in the past of being a bad defender, or worse, someone that would get picked on in a series like Michael Porter Jr. And we just didn't really see that. There were a few instances today where they got by Devin Booker, but we're not seeing it relentlessly like we did with Michael Porter Jr. Same time, Nuggets didn't have a guy like Chris Paul who was just going at the throat constantly to set up against Michael Porter Jr. It would be interesting if a team, and maybe we'll see it still going forward, if a team really put all their eggs into that basket of going at Devin Booker as the weak link in the starting lineup. But yeah, he's too proud and too good. Sorry, Sam, jump in.
No, sorry. I think that team would be the Paperclips, would be the ones who are likely to do that. It's funny because I think we've gotten to a point where I actually saw Denver trying to target Chris Paul in this game, which is not easy. Like, it's not easy to do that either. But he's been kind of in that off-ball helper role now for a few years. The Suns try and hide him a little bit away from the initial actions because he's just so small and also obviously old. I think if there's anyone teams try to target, it's kind of more so Chris Paul than Booker at this point. But to the original point, Booker has immensely improved. And I think we lose sight often when we talk about defense in this league. Like, it's so black and white, the way we talk about defense. And I understand it's hard because none of the metrics are entirely reliable. So it turns into this conversation of player X is good, player Y is bad. But like, if you look at various superstars, while it is a valid point to talk about, hey, your guard needs to not just score, they need to also, they need to have a two-way impact in order to get far in the playoffs. I think, there's Trae Young, and then there's Damian Lillard, and then there's Devin Booker. And for years, there has been varying levels of bad. And like, I think there are many shades between those 3 players that I just listed. Like, the insinuation that Booker was ever on Trae Young levels would be ridiculous. And now would be that he's improved even more, especially absurd. So it's like, yeah, he was really bad there for a couple years. And the past couple years he's been kind of bad. And then I agree with you, David. Now I think he's more or less average. He's really come a long way.
Let's take a minute to even talk about that. Not a game changer, empty stats, looter in a riot, should have played FIBA World Cup, doesn't make his teammates better, Lou Williams type player, cursed. People are saying he's cursed.
That was always stupid. Yeah.
We should take a moment to just appreciate that in his first playoffs ever, Devin Booker has made it to the Western Conference Finals and only lost 2 games in order to get there. A pretty remarkable accomplishment for such a young player, and to see his growth and what he's become has been really fun. First of all, entertaining. Ultimately, that's what basketball is. It's entertaining, but also kind of satisfying, I think, for Suns fans who have spent a lot of time sort of defending him as a player and trying to get people to open their eyes to what he was and what he could be. I have found it very satisfying to see this playoff run where I think he's just been very, very... It's almost like surgical in how he's played, which I think is partially the influence on Chris Paul, who, of course, we need to talk about after this. But I have very much enjoyed watching Devin Booker get to this point. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the word that I would use would be cathartic. As you said, Mike, we had to wait. We had to kind of bide our time while all these insults were getting thrown at Booker, because, if we tried to go back at any of them, the very easy comeback was, well, he hasn't played in the playoffs yet, just wait and see. And now we have. we've got 2 series in the bank. They've picked up both series so far. In his first ever playoffs, as you said, Mike, he's in the Western Conference Finals, which, I'm laughing while I'm saying it because, it's ridiculous from where we've come from, but B, it's just amazing for Devon. And I'm poring over his stats here, and he's done absolutely everything that you would want from your main scorer in these first 2 series, and I just can't speak highly enough of him. I'm really, I'm thankful for him, and I'm thankful that he's finally been given this opportunity to, show who he was, because I think all of us who watch Suns games day in, day out, night in, night out, loss after loss, we could see this. We could see that he didn't have the talent around him and he was just ready to explode. And it just feels so damn good that he's finally been given the chance to.
I can't even lie to you guys. I am usually pretty good at restraining myself on Twitter, but tonight I figured I had one loaded shot and I had to use it. I added Bomani Jones for that comment about not being a game changer. I was like, you know what? He's going to block me. I've got one shot here. This is the time I got to use it. Because, yeah, I mean, come on. Like, bullshit. And we can move on from, just complete garbage analysis like that, obviously. But yeah, catharsis, or being cathartic, that's the right word, David.
And just to quickly jump in, guys, Jokic, what Jokic did and him going in as our leader, as the star. I can't even remember. You guys might remember if CP3 was on the court at that time. I'm kind of guessing that he's not, because he probably would have been in the thick of it if he was. But just seeing him step up as our star, as our leader in that moment as well, just felt like a really big moment for his career.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Yeah, because I was watching the game with some family, and they were a little worried about him getting in trouble for that. And the whole time I was saying, I love this. I love this. You love to see him step up for a guy like Campaign, who everyone knows his story and what he went through to get to where they are, and also someone that the fans just love. And it was tough to see him down on the ground at the time, of course, not knowing how bad he's injured. It seems like he's okay. Hopefully nothing's broken there. And Devin Booker stepping up in that moment was really great. There was a stretch in this game, I think you can call it the why you trade for Chris Paul stretch of the game, where he just took over in a way that I don't know that I have seen since he was on the Houston Rockets in the playoffs, I believe in 2018. It was most similar to that to me. He talked about it in the post-game interview. He mentioned drop defenses and how when he was in the Clippers, teams went to drop defenses and he wanted to learn how to kill that, and that was sort of the mid-range game. Obviously, an insane performance for him. The most, they kept saying it in the broadcast, the most he's scored in the last 3 years, ended with 37 points, insanely efficient, only 19 shots to get there, and then still, of course, had 7 assists. I mean, they were just dropping back and staying true on shooters, and he was killing them over and over and over again. David, what did you think of Chris Paul's performance tonight?
I mean, tonight, the series, the playoffs, he's been incredible for this team and everything that we could have asked for when they traded for him. Like, look at these 4 games, 25.5 points per game, 62% from the field, 75% from 3 on pretty low volume. Didn't miss a free throw all series at 5.5 a game. 10.3 assists to 1.3 turnovers, 1.5 steals. Like, what else can you say about the dude's series? And then tonight was just the crescendo of it all, I suppose. He just really put his stamp all over this game. The biggest thing for me was, I don't think I appreciated this enough about Chris Paul, and this is even being a huge fan of his entire career. I just think that his ability to switch between scoring and setting up for others, and then taking that against a guy, I guess my son's hero, Steve Nash, who in retrospect we always said, didn't score enough when he had to. Seeing him flick that switch in a game like this, you said it, Mike, where he just took over. That's the big difference, and that's what I'm going to remember the playoffs so far, and hopefully for the rest of the playoffs, because he just senses when the team doesn't have it and he needs to take over, and he just hits 4 buckets in a row. I think Reggie Miller said tonight he hit 9 shots in a row during that stretch, and that's just incredible to watch when you're a fan of the team, and he's not killing your team in previous days gone by.
I mean, he just makes it look so easy, like he's running a scrimmage. That's what it was tonight, and those averages you threw out for the series, phenomenal. just totally phenomenal. I really hope, I hope for our sake, being Suns fans, that he can win a ring, but also I hope this guy continues to be seen as the great legendary talent he is. He continues to shoot up the all-time leaderboards. I don't want to think necessarily about where he ranks all time right now, but I see more people kind of waking up to the idea that, hey, maybe he's top 4, top 5, and I like to see that because I really think he's just been that amazing for the league. But with that post-game interview too, I thought it was funny because usually players they just don't go into strategy at all in a 30-second soundbite with a sideline reporter after the game. So for him to even talk about there's this thing called drop coverage, I thought, man, this is a guy, doesn't this sound like a guy who's just, his eyes are getting wide at the thought of that Rudy Gobert drop coverage in the Western Conference Finals, if it ends up being that, as we can kind of think about the hypotheticals, maybe project forward a little bit, that would be pretty good for Chris Paul. It'd be a very difficult team to play in other ways, but that would be pretty good, that aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should, before we end this podcast, talk about who we'd rather face in the Western Conference Finals. I have a feeling we'd all be on the same page with that one. But I want to get to just a few more guys in this series, at least one more, and then I'll give you guys an opportunity to talk about whoever you guys want as well. But on our last episode, Sam, you and I started out just gushing about DeAndre Ayton and what he's done against the Nuggets in this series. This may be his worst game so far, and still great. Still a really good game for him. I would call this series for him a career-defining series for him up to this point, in a way that you just sort of understand what he could be and how valuable he can be for a team. We spent a lot of time talking about it, Sam, but David, we haven't yet talked to you about it. I'd love to hear what you thought of DeAndre Ayton in this series.
Yeah, it's hard to fault, I mean, obviously we all knew going into the series that Jokic was going to get his, but that we were going to be super reliant on DeAndre Ayton to, A, stay on the floor and B, compete hard against him and make sure that, nothing that he got, came easy. Tonight was probably the first night that he got in a little bit of foul trouble the entire playoffs so far, so that's not bad. 1 out of 8 games when it was something that we were all, pretty shit scared of going into the playoffs, looking at the depth behind him at the center position. But he played Jokic just about as well as you possibly could. Sam, you and I joked during the game today because you noted his verticality on spaces this morning before the game, and straight into the game. I think in the first quarter he showed a perfect example of that on a rotation that the Suns got a stop from. I think Jay Crowder actually may have even blocked the shot after
he did. Yeah.
Ayton showed that verticality at the rim. He just plays within himself. He doesn't try and do too much. And we've seen, and I think you guys have noted just as much as I have in the past few years, when he's given a job and he can just focus on that job, he's pretty amazing at it. And particularly for him to do it now through 2 series, 10 games total now that we've been able to count on him. Nothing special, nothing flashy, just the defense against Jokic in particular was super, super solid. And probably the other thing that I just want to note from this series versus the Lakers series, some of his finishing in the paint and around the rim in this series was incredible compared to last series. I kind of copped a little bit of flack when I said last series he was basically just doing what the Lakers were giving him, which was getting to the front of the rim and getting open dunks. But this series was a little bit different. There was a few moments where we lent on him to create something in the paint over Jokic. He went to that hook shot a few times and was successful with that. Some of his just finishes running down the paint in transition when they hit him on the roll. Left hand, right hand. He had some really nice finishes, and looking at the stats here, 61% again for the 4 games, so pretty consistent with his season numbers there. So yeah, I was super impressed. We all said it at the start, you weren't going to be able to judge him or his defense by Jokic's, I guess, final box score numbers, but he was relatively inefficient in a few of those games, and Ayton deserves all the credit for that, I think.
I'm mostly just in awe of, when we talked about this on Spaces, but obviously a lot of people weren't on that Spaces, his ability to stay out of foul trouble again. This was the series. This was the series where they were going to take Ayton out of the game by putting him into foul trouble. Because now, we look forward at Utah, the Clippers. Those are teams with phenomenal shooting talents. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley, all those guys could theoretically be dangerous to DeAndre Ayton. They could potentially cook him. I mean, I'm not saying they will. I'm saying it's a possibility. But if they did, it would be through jump shots. It would be through pull-up threes. It would be through switching and then scoring in the mid-range. Regardless, they're not going to put a lot of pressure on him at the rim. That's just not how those two teams operate. Gobert is Gobert, but even in the way that Gobert plays, like, he's going to catch lobs that were already open. He's not going to foul out Ayton because that's not how Gobert plays. So for him to have survived this series, playing as much as he did, for this to be the first game where he even slightly struggled with foul trouble, and now you know that, or at least you're pretty confident that it's not going to be an issue going forward. He's going to be able to stay on the floor. He's going to give you those 35, 40 minutes that you need from him. I can't say enough about how special that is. Yeah.
An incredible series, career defining so far, and he's got still time to make even more impact going forward. I want to give each of you or both of you a chance here to just bring up any moment or player from this series that you want to talk about before we move on, because I think there's a lot. It was 4 games, obviously a short series, as short as they can get nowadays. But there's still a lot that happened, and I know there's some players that we've touched on in our other post-game episodes, but if there's anybody that stands out to either one of you, since I'm putting you on the spot, I'll let either one of you jump in and take a moment to talk.
David goes first since he's our guest.
Okay, David, I guess we're putting you on the spot first. Is there any other player or any moment that stood out to you?
It's only fair. I put Sam on the spot a few times this morning, throwing him into some questions. So I'm happy to take the reins on this one. I think there's a couple of guys to choose from. I'm going to hope that Sam is going to bring up the other guy that I won't mention here. And you said moment or player there. I'll kind of, I guess, mesh 2 into 1 there, looking back at this game 4 in particular, Mike. Jay Crowder and his start in this game, like, closeout game, sure, it wasn't a game that the Suns, had to win, but the way he started just set the tone tonight. And I'm just looking at his overall series stats, 12 points per game. We know we're never going to expect Jay to be a 20-point per game scorer, but he shot 54.5% from 3 on 5.5 attempts a game. So really bounced back after that Lakers series. And he had 4 blocks. I think probably should have even been credited with 5 tonight, which would have been a career high for Jay. But just his defense in that first quarter in particular really set the tone of the Suns weren't going to roll over and let the Nuggets out with, a gentleman sweep or something in this series. They came to snatch the series away in 4 and sweep them. And I thought that his leadership in this game in particular, but particularly the series overall and the playoffs overall, has just been super key. We talk about Chris Paul all the time, but Jay in particular is someone that Monty always raves about, and I always try and pay special attention to that, because for all the good that guys like us do trying to analyze the team every day, there's certain things that we don't get to see as not being part of the team and not even being media members at and I guess no media members at the moment are allowed in the locker room and stuff, but we don't see those little behind the scenes things. So whenever Monty makes a point to bring up Jay, it has a lot of weight for me. So I just think that he deserves a hell of a lot of credit for the way he finished this series.
That was a really good choice. That's a very good choice, and that was the first guy I thought of too. I'm not going to lie.
You should have gone first, Sam.
No, that's okay, because I mean the guy that I'll bring up, I think, and I assume it's the other guy David was talking about, Mikal Bridges.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I mean, this is a starters.
Right.
I mean, like,
this is a starters series, right? It was the starters that killed him.
This was a starter series. We all love Cam Payne. We all love Cam Johnson. Dario was good this series. Hey, we can say that. Dario was good this series. But it was a starter series. Mikal Bridges bounced back from his Lakers performance, averaged 16 points per game over these 4. Did exactly what he needed to. Attacked closeouts, shot the 3 well, defended. He wasn't exactly given or tasked with a defensive assignment as difficult as LeBron James in this one, going up against. I guess Porter was, at some points making shots, but for the most part, struggled. So, but yeah, I mean, Mikal was really impressive. Like you said, Mike, starter series. I mean, these were the guys who they developed that continuity throughout the season. And then this is why you do that. This is why you hope for a clean bill of health and that those guys can develop that so that they can just get rolling in the playoffs. And they absolutely were over the past week.
Can I quickly throw a question both your guys' way? Because I know that you laughed about the fact that Jay Crowder was not in the starting lineup. I think it was in your last episode, actually, commenting on the fact that Frank was. I was annoyed at that. I commented on it just as much as you guys did at the time, that they were mucking around and not getting that continuity with Jay, because it was bleedingly obvious that he was going to be in the starters when the Suns made the playoffs. Is there a chance, Monty did that on purpose to Jay to keep him hungry and kind of, I guess, keep this attitude from him the whole way through the series? Because it's really the only justification I can think of now in hindsight of why Monty did it.
I'm not sure, but what I will say is, if there's anyone in the Suns locker room who I really wouldn't want to be mad at me, I wouldn't want Jay Crowder to be mad at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's gonna be an intense figure, and I'm sure that is not a thought that's really running through Monty's head. But that's just me personally. I can't find the rationale there.
I think that if there's a documentary about this game, I mean, he should probably say that. Monty Williams should probably say that at least to give the impression that was the case. But I think it's funny that if you're going to play a player over Jay Crowder in order to motivate him, it's definitely going to be Frank Kaminsky. Like, that's the right choice. That's the right choice to pick in order to motivate him, because, look, Frank Kaminsky seems like a fun guy to be around. There's a reason he hasn't played at all in the playoffs, and Jay Crowder has been, by some metrics, the best player on the Suns. Obviously not quite the case, but I think those metrics do mean something when you're looking at them, because the Suns are just really, really, really good when he's on the court. In fact, the biggest run that the Nuggets went on in this game was when Jay Crowder was off the court, and I don't think that was a coincidence. So, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think Monty Williams should take the credit for it if he hasn't thought of it yet. Looking forward, right now, as we record this, we started about 20 minutes after the final buzzer. The Clippers and the Jazz are in a 2-1 series. The Clippers just took Game 3. Donovan Mitchell apparently is struggling with his ankle a little bit. Mike Conley not quite in the rotation yet. The Clippers looking a little bit better after Game 3. Maybe they have a chance to take another home game, and then hopefully that series goes as long as possible as far as getting these guys rest and making sure everyone's as healthy as possible. I assume this. I'm just going to make the assumption. When we look at those teams, I think that the Suns match up better against the Jazz, although they're technically playing better at this moment. David, do you agree with that? And Sam, you too, after him?
Yeah, I do. I think there's something about the known quantity of the Jazz. We know they're not going to throw too many surprises at us, and we did pretty well against them during the regular season, even though a lot has changed for both teams since then. So, yeah, I'm just going with the known quantity of who the Jazz are and how we match up against them. It is the better matchup as far as I'm concerned. Sam, Max and I debated about it a little bit this morning, and I can definitely understand why you might go the Clippers if they can't quite reach their full potential or close to it, but manage to somehow get over the Jazz. But I'm just still too scared of the variability in that team and the star power that they have on it, particularly with Kawhi Leonard. So, yeah, I think, pound for pound, matchup for matchup, it's much better if we go up against the Jazz. What do you think, Sam?
What I can say is I would really like potentially up to 7 games of a Jay Crowder-Paul George matchup. I think Jay would get in his head. If you talk about the weaknesses for the Clippers, I think that's maybe where you start. That would be really fun to see. However, I will concede the Jazz are the better matchup for us. Both of these would be really tough. You have to be good at different things. You have to be not... That's the thing, is the Suns have been really good to this point, but with teams with as much offensive firepower as the Jazz and the Clippers, now it's about being elite. You're one of the 4 teams remaining, so it's going to be really tough, but I would give the edge to the Jazz being easier.
I think the only other reason you would pick the Clippers is home court advantage, which the Suns would hold over the Clippers. They don't have over the Jazz. The Jazz winning one, I think it ended up being one more game than the Suns in the regular season. But when you look at the Jazz, Chris Paul has eliminated them twice. That's happened recently. He likes the way that they play defense. He likes to play against that style of defense. So I think that you have to sort of lean that way. But yeah, I think and also, they're not really healthy. I mean, that's part of it. They're struggling with health a little bit. If they manage to get by the Clippers, they might be a little banged up, which I think would benefit the Suns. Not that that's a fun strategy to talk about. It's just the truth. The Suns have benefited from teams being banged up in the playoffs, as every team that makes it to the finals generally does. But yeah, I think that you have to really single out the Jazz for that reason specifically. If you start against the Jazz and you start at home, you take one of those first 2 home games, and if you could win the next 2, the 2 home games for the Jazz, and if you can win the next 2 in Phoenix, then, I mean, that's exactly what you'd want to do, which I think the Suns could be pretty confident in doing with the way that they've played so far. Just quickly, we haven't done our research. Obviously, we're going to be watching very closely the rest of the semis with those teams. Is there any specific thing that stands out against either of these teams as far as maybe something that would be an X factor, if you will, for the Suns for either of these matchups, David?
I mean, I think you just mentioned it there, health. Like, as Sam said at the top, we're going to be sitting around waiting, for this series to be over so the Suns can get going again. I'm certainly going to try and enjoy the rest, but going to have one eye on this series, knowing that we have to play the other team. And I don't want it to be a cop-out, but I think you said it there, Mike. Generally the further you get along in the playoffs, you do get some advantages purely through health and guys being banged up. So I kind of want this series to go on. Paul George and Kawhi have both had their issues all season with kind of, injuries that they've had to deal with. As you said, Donovan's starting to complain about his ankle again, and Conley's been out with the hamstring. So, I know it's not a particularly nuanced point here, but I just hope that they keep, beating the hell out of each other and that it goes as long as possible. And to that point, I hadn't thought about this until you said it, Mike, but if it is the Jazz that come out, my main concern with the Suns having this much rest is just that game 1 and coming out a little bit rusty. I feel a bit better about it if we're actually on the road for those first 2 games, and the goal is to just try and pinch one of those first 2, get back in a rhythm, and then come back and protect home court. So in a weird way, I think for that point, I'll be rooting for the Jazz as well, just knowing how much rest the Suns are going to get from this period, even if I am a little bit concerned if it's too much rest.
Yeah, I would echo David's points. I'm not particularly looking at anything. I guess the follow-up question I was going to ask you is, so are you worried about if they beat the hell out of each other for 7 games, are you worried about the Suns having that rest? But you basically answered that question there, David. I guess, yeah, I guess the reason I'm not worried about the rest just for myself is because even though Chris Paul just had the most phenomenal series and we didn't see any physical signs of him grimacing, there's always that thought, or there was that persistent thought in the back of my mind throughout the past week of what if he's playing through a lot of pain? Definitely the next week would help him in order to be fully healthy for that next series. So I have been thinking about that, but otherwise, yeah, I guess it's a valid concern that they could come out flat initially, though.
Yeah, I think the advantage of making sure that, one of the main bench players just got whacked in the face in this game. I think the advantage of becoming healthy over that time, I think, outweighs any other thing in my mind. And it wouldn't hurt, I think, if, say, the Jazz won the next 2 games and you just knew the matchup and they were ready to go right away. I don't think that I would be mad about that either. But tiring one of those teams out doesn't hurt. Maybe they figure something out if they go to 7 games, and that makes you a little bit more concerned, but that's not something that I'm totally worried about. The Phoenix Suns have won 7 playoff games in a row. 7 playoff games in a row. That's kind of crazy to think about. They won the final 3 games against the Lakers, and then they swept the Denver Nuggets. I'm really amazed by it overall more than anything else, and I'm terrified of that first loss. I've gotten very used to winning in the playoffs, but I just want to just take another moment just to acknowledge how amazing that this team has been. David, I really appreciate you joining us. We're going to let you go now so we can get this one out to people as quickly as possible. Obviously, read David's newsletter. Check out when he records podcasts. David, tell the people about your newsletter a little bit.
Yeah, you can subscribe to it at the 4pointplay.substack.com. I'm sure most people listening either follow me or are aware of me on Twitter and maybe choose not to follow me, and that is totally fine. But if you do like the content that you've seen from me, check out the newsletter. Whenever I do a random podcast, it'll go out through the newsletter. And with things being so tight turnaround at the moment, I'm doing a little bit of video content directly on Twitter as well, which you should check out. I guess as a little bit of a hint for Game 4, I will probably look at that Spain pick and roll that they ran that gave a Chris Paul direct lane to the bucket when they really needed a bucket after that timeout. So I think Game 4 of the Lakers series was a Spain pick and roll that I highlighted, and Game 4 of the Nuggets was a Spain pick and roll as well. And thanks for reminding me that we just won 7 games in a row, Mike, because I'd forgotten, and that is just ridiculous at the same time. And thanks to you guys for inviting me on. As I said, I've really been enjoying these podcasts from you guys, and it's a pleasure to be able to join you on one in such a great atmosphere of closing out the series against the Nuggets, guys.
Gladly, anytime, man. And I'll just echo that the video content David's talking about is fantastic, so go and follow his Twitter because he's been doing those in-depth breakdowns after every game. I will say, it's funny that specific play you're talking about, I know exactly which one you're talking about because it so vividly sticks out on my mind. Normally it's like Spain pick and roll, like, oh, the Suns do that like 10 times a game. But this one, there was a different element to it, a different quality that was beautiful. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. Normally at this point of the podcast, we tell you when we're going to be back. I don't actually know when we're going to be back with another episode. But whenever we're back, we'll be previewing the Western Conference Finals, likely when we know who that opponent will be, but we are very much looking forward to it. Thank you for everyone who's been listening to these post-game episodes, and you'll hear from us again soon.